それでは持続可能な公共調達における国際的な視点、トレンドと課題についてということで、国連環境計画 UNEP のプロジェクトリーダーのファリッドさんにお話を伺いたいと思います。では最初に UNEP のファリッドさんの活動についてお話を聞かせてください。
Okay, so as I said, I'm the program officer in charge of sustainable public procurement. I work for the economy division, which is one of the major divisions of the United Nations Environment Program. And we've been busy with the subject of sustainable public procurement for, let's say, 15 years now. We're one of the leaders in the world, at least in the UN system in this area. And my job is I've been busy with working on the methodology for the measurement of SDG, Sustainable Development Goal 12.7.1 indicator. This indicator is about the number of countries that are starting or implementing sustainable public procurement. And we, in the UN, we came up with a methodology to measure if a country can be considered as implementing sustainable procurement or is not yet in the phase of implementation. So recently, this methodology has been approved by our colleagues in New York who are overseeing the SDGs, and they have said that the methodology can now be considered to be robust, and we can go into collecting the data from countries and also training countries on the measurement of this indicator. So this is my first job, my main task. I'm also busy supporting countries directly, our member states, on embedding sustainable public procurement in their day-to-day practices. So we work all over the world. I'm from Latin America to Africa to Asia. We've been supporting 20 countries directly, the governments, in establishing policies to accelerate the shift to sustainable public procurement. So this means working on the legal framework. This means picking new products or prioritizing products for which we are going to develop criteria that are going to be included in the public procurement system. This means training procurers. This means setting up information systems. This means monitoring also the progress. We are also working at the regional level, and here I would like to cite one activity that is going to start soon, and it's the network, a new Asia-Pacific GPP network that is going to be launched soon, thanks to the support of the Korean government. So this will help us also improve the coordination of the policies in Asia Pacific, learn from each other, exchange know-how, do peer-to-peer exchanges and learnings, and exchange tools and resources.
パリだけではなく世界中がこのコロナのパンデミックで大変な影響を受けているわけですけれども、そういう中で SPP もしくは GPP ですね、そして持続可能な消費やエシカル消費に対して果たすことのできる役割ってのはどういうものがあるでしょう。例えば具体的に言うと消費行動がどういうふうに変わっていくのか、もしくはさまざまなサプライチェーンの中での人権問題はどうなっていくんだろうかとか、もしくは市民や消費者のライフスタイルがどういうふうに変わっていくのか、そして市民参加や社会参加も含めてどういう影響があるんだろうか、その辺ファリッドさんのご意見を聞かせていただきたいと思います。
Well, first we have to start from the background. What is the background? The situation. The situation of the Earth has unfortunately worsened over the last decades. We have global warming, we have depletion of resources, we have loss of biodiversity, massive. We have plastic pollution, loss of arable lands, and so on and so on and so on. We have so many problems that we can cite. And we have also the social side. mounting inequalities, persistence or rise of forced labor or modern slavery situations. So we can say that our current development is neither sustainable nor equitable. So the international community has tried to respond to these mounting problems, and they met in 1972. Then in 1992 in Rio, we tried to shape the response, develop the concept of sustainable development, then met in Joburg, then met in Paris with the climate agreement. But unfortunately, we have to face it, we haven't been able to reverse these negative trends. And the COVID-19 crisis has highlighted the fragility of the world towards pandemics and the risk of facing even more deadly pandemics in the future because of the destruction of ecosystems and the trading of wild animals. And here we notice that unsustainable consumption plays a critical role in the current negative trends, and it affects which affect the planet and the people. This awareness of the importance of consumption dates back from 1992, but it was really reaffirmed in 2002 at the Joburg Summit, and we have a full chapter of the Johannesburg Plan of Implementation, which was dedicated to unsustainable patterns of consumption. And the title of the chapter was Changing Unsustainable Patterns of Consumption and Production. And the chapter highlighted that the fundamental changes in the way societies produce and consume are indispensable for achieving global sustainable development. So I would even argue that consumption is even more important than production, because we know that demand drives supply. We know that the productive sector, manufacturing sector, the marketing responds to the demand of the consumers. Of course, there is attempt to shape and to influence consumers, and they shouldn't be minimized. But in the end, it's really consumers that through their consumption patterns, through their desires, through their wishes, shape the productive sector and the types of products that are put on the market. So, for example, it is because we have demand for tropical timber that we are depleting the tropical forests. It's because there is demand for red tuna that we have depleting stocks, and also demand for wild animals are cause, we think, of the pandemics. Demand for cheap garments lead to human rights abuses. In UNEP, we distinguish individual consumption from institutional consumption. And this means that we have to make both individuals and companies and governments aware of the impacts of their consumption on the planet and the people. So in UNEP, we use the term sustainable procurement or sustainable consumption, but I like also to use ethical or responsible procurement, because I think there is also a moral and ethical dimensions which are also important. So even though the situation is bad and worsening, we are encouraged by the rising awareness of the younger generations, and we're seeing that they're turning to action, changing their consumption patterns to reduce their impact. So we see, for example, the rise of veganism. Much more and more people eat less meat. They are aware about the impact of their travel, especially if they take the plane. So there is a rising consciousness, at least in developed countries, and that's the main issue, because this cannot happen when the social conditions are not met, when people don't have access to their basic needs. So it's important that we work on the environment, but at the same time we fight poverty, because conscious consumers cannot emerge in situations where basic needs are not met. But awareness is not enough, you would tell me, and we know that. We also have to make sure that greener or more sustainable products are accessible, are available, and they are not too expensive. This can be achieved through increased demand, of course, as we said earlier, which would lead to economies of scale. Prices will go down. We've seen that for paper, we see it for gloves, we see it for LED lights, etc. Whenever there is a higher demand, prices go down and they become accessible. So this can be achieved also through adequate fiscal, tax and industrial policies. Sustainable consumption is not just the individual, but then we have to have the right environment, the right measures around it. And also we have to consider the impacts of production and consumption on stocks, for example, the fish stocks, and on global warming, water or air quality. So we have to get out of an economic thinking based on flows, for example, the GDP indicator, and we have to move to thinking based on the preservation of our heritage, be they social, natural, or cultural. Now, this is really should be the aim, is try to maintain our heritage or make it even larger, richer, but not what we're seeing right now, where we're losing our natural heritage and sometimes our cultural heritages. So this means that we have to give a price to scarcity. It also means that we have to factor in negative externalities in our pricing systems. When we buy a good which has a negative impact on the climate, we have to give this has to be factored in. It has to be reflected in the price of the good, even if it's a diesel car or if it's an incandescent light bulb. We have to give it a negative price there. At some point, I think we should also extend the notion of quotas to individuals. I believe that we, as humans, should be entitled to have a certain quota, for example, of CO2, which already applies to companies, and in the future will apply to governments, but it should also be extended to individuals. Institutions can play a major role to steer markets towards sustainability. Indeed, governments and companies, because of the size of their procurement, are uniquely positioned to demand transparency into the upstream and downstream impacts of goods and services, and they are capable of incorporating sustainability criteria into purchasing decisions at a scale that can shift markets, especially if these criteria are harmonized, i.e. if we have a consistent demand signal addressed to the market, then we can have a much more effective sustainable purchasing policy.
気候危機の回避に対する例えば SPP であるとか、持続可能な消費の果たす役割までご説明いただき、さらに消費者の教育についても触れていただいたと思いますけれども、私たちは今いわゆるグリーン調達とかですね、もしくは生物多様性の問題とか、いろんな取り組まなきゃいけない問題があるんですけども、エシカル消費についてファリッドさんのご意見を聞かせてください。
Of course, make sure to reduce the consumption of energy-intensive or GHG emitting products in favor of more climate consumption on global warming is enormous. So, and the impact happens not only in the use phase, but also in the extraction phase, in the manufacturing phase, in the transport phase. So, and of course, after disposal of goods. So we have to look at things in a global way, in a cycle, in the life cycle, all the life cycle aspects and all the life cycle stages of consumption and production, and their ethical consumption is key, because consumers are placed in the supply chain. Whether we speak of individual consumers or institutional consumers, they are at a critical position in the supply chain because they have the decision power. So they can arbitrate between the goods. Okay, so they can say, I want to use bike or go by foot instead of driving. They can use the train instead of a plane. They can use LED lights instead of incandescent lights. and we name it. You name it. So then they can really, if it's one individual consumer, we won't have a difference. But if it's a whole movement, in the world, then it will make a difference. And in UNEP, we try also already to mobilize all the governments. We try to mobilize the local authorities, and we have a similar movement in the private sector, and we have a similar movement among individual consumers. But the movement is not strong enough, and we have more and more consumers. So we have to be even more aware, even more conscious, even more organized. And the conference and the event you're organizing will help in this regard. We have to have conscious consumers again. This means consumers who are also citizens. And two, we have to have supportive policies from the state. Bearing in mind that at least in democracies, there is a connection between the two. Because governments are elected by citizens. So we see the results in the US or in Brazil when we have the election of presidents who do not themselves believe in global warming. So this means increased exploitation of fossil fuels, accelerated depletion of the Amazon forest, with all the negative consequences on the climate. So we have to make sure also that citizens are exemplary in their consumption, but also in the way in their civic, I would say, practices, and they make sure that they have the governments that protect the earth and really put in place the right political environment, legal environment for the situation to change.
今いわゆるコロナ感染の影響というものが非常に働く現場であるとか、もしくは生産現場であるとか、もしくはステイホームということで私たち消費者のライフスタイルにも大きな影響を与えてますけれども、例えばエコロジカルフットプリントで考えればこれ以上の持続不可能な消費はやめた方がいいよと言ってるわけなんですけど、片一方で自分の命と健康を守るためにですね、使い捨てをせざるを得なくなってる。水も流しっぱなしにしなきゃいけない。そういう問題が出てくるわけですけれども、最後の質問はポストコロナ、いずれ 1,2 年のうちになんとか他のインフルエンザのように収束はしていくんだろうと思いますけれども、そういうこのポストコロナに対する持続可能な調達や、もしくは持続可能な消費やエシカル消費が今後考えなきゃいけない課題ってのは何なのかありましたら教えてください。
So the problems are that besides sanitary consequences, COVID-19 has also negative economic consequences. These recessions are becoming more and more deep all over the world. So we see an increase in poverty, joblessness. We have people that are going to really doubting about their future. We have people that are going back to the countryside. We have companies that are going bankrupt. So the situation is economically very worrisome. And of course, it's in rich governments, in rich countries, the governments could, for the moment, limit the negative social consequences. They put in place stimulus packages, safety nets, etc., which is not the case in developing countries, where the poor and the informed by the COVID crisis. So we have two different situations depending where we sit. However, lockdown periods were also the occasion for middle-class consumers to question their consumerist models, and also for richer consumers. However, it seems that at the end of the lockdown, they went back to business as usual types of consumption behaviors. Maybe because, they had a thirst for consumption that came back, but also because they needed to arbitrate between different consumption. During the lockdown, they could do forced savings, and so they could concentrate on some goods that were more, I would say, greener. For example, organic food. We saw an increase in the consumption of organic food. I think went back to their traditional habits, and the consumption of organic food went down again. Also because of the economic situation, then they have to pay attention to their purchasing power, and then price came back as a criteria, the main criteria of decision in purchasing. What is clear is that the COVID-19 crisis offers an opportunity to green our economies, to green stimulus packages, where we can favor, for example, rehabilitation of buildings, or investments in electrical vehicles, or green mobility. And another lever governments have at their disposal are green conditionalities imposed on bailed out companies. So it's an opportunity for public policies to really switch and shift the economy towards. However, the feedback we get from the stimulus packages that have been initiated around the world are that they are not solid enough, they're not green enough to really make this push towards sustainable economies. It has been the main objective is, of course, creation of jobs. It's facing and preventing the recession. So some green measures have been introduced, but we cannot say that these plans, that stimulus packages, are green.
では最後に日本の消費者、徳島に向けてですね、メッセージをお願いしたいと思います。
The COVID crisis has something very, very good also it showed us that we didn't have to be present physically everywhere, that we could do a lot also through the modern ways of communication, and thanks to that, I'm able to talk to you, and we saved the travel and a lot of emissions. However, nothing will replace physical contact, physical presence, and I hope that we will keep some level of physical presence, in-person presence in the future, because it's important to keep this closeness and this I would say interaction. In terms of message, the main message I wanted to convey is that we haven't been successful so far. Really, we have failed in preventing the rising social inequalities and the fact that poverty and hunger remain really prevalent on the earth. And the second message is that this is not something we should live with. We should fight, and we should make sure that the future generations have a chance to recover their heritage. They have a chance to live in a planet that has so many natural assets, so many cultural life that the one we enjoyed in our time. So we have the duty really to react. We have the duty to put our selfishness aside and think about the future generations. And we have the duty of collaborating. We have the duty of working together between private sector, public sector, local government, and central government, within government, between generations, between countries. We should all be united to tackle these problems. It is now or never. We are at a crossroads, and we have to be really mobilized, and mobilized has to be maximum to avoid the threats that are looming ahead, and which can really lead to destruction of the humanity. Thank you very much, and we count on you to support us, and we are, of course, always there to support our member states and everyone on the planet. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Farid.
Merci.
Yeah.
Merci, mon ami.